The internet device explosion that we've seen over the past 10 years helped create an internet addressing problem. But for the most part, companies were able to safely migrate from IPv4 to IPv6, but several challenges remain. On this episode of Today in Tech, we're going to ask the question, why are we still talking about IPv4? And does it matter? Hi, everyone. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me in studio is Lee Howard. He is the Senior Vice President at IPv4 Global. Welcome to the show and welcome to the studio, Lee.
Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me come in.
All right. So I'm an old school networking guy. I worked for Network World for several years. So I do love this history of IPv4 and the migration to IPv6. It reminds me of the days of the kind of the Y2K issues where there was a lot of people in the tech industry going not panic, but going warning, 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 danger, Will Robinson type of things. So, I thought that maybe 3 or 4 years ago that we sort of solved the problem. So why are we here talking about IPv6? Did something happen that I missed, basically?
It's funny because I was having a conversation just a month or two ago with a colleague of mine who I'd worked with when I was doing IPv6 at a large network.
Yeah.
And we hadn't talked in a couple of years, and he said, "You're working on IPv4 stuff? I thought we'd solved that. Like, what happened? What's going on?" So I think kind of the where we sit right now is a lot of companies have deployed IPv6. You go to Google and Yahoo and Facebook and LinkedIn, they're all IPv6 and it works great. You go to Twitter and maybe some of your favorite adult sites, and they don't necessarily have IPv6. And so there's still content out there that hasn't deployed IPv6 yet. And it seems like they sort of think it's somebody else's problem. Like, we have enough addresses. Like, why should we migrate to IPv6? It's a little work for us. So that's there's still this gap of, if you only have IPv4, you can't speak to something that only has IPv6. And so people kind of have to do both, the dual stack solution.
Right. Let's talk a little bit, just in case the audience doesn't remember what IPv4 is, or, explain it to my grandmother type of thing. And go back to as far as you need to in terms of the history of the internet.
So networking is about connecting devices. A device can send data to another device. The network technology, the protocol that defines the vocabulary and the grammar that they use to speak to each other is the internet protocol, and that includes an address that uniquely defines a device so that you can send out a packet of data to a destination address,
right.
And the internet figures out how to get it there. Really, this is the stuff that I love. This is sort of why I got into this field. When the first IPv4 spec was written, I think it was 1978, finally published in 1980, there weren't many computers in the world, right? So it was pre PC boom, and so
like mainframes and
terminals, craze,
and,
supercomputers, right? And so at that time, it seemed like, hey, they said almost arbitrarily, 4.3 billion possible addresses will be enough. It's 32 bits. It's enough addresses for the foreseeable future. But it was kind of just a test. Like, they've just been doing tests to see how internet communication could work. Well, then we had PC boom, and we had AOL and Prodigy, and then we had sort of generic online services pop up.
Yeah.
And so we outgrew the IPv4 space.
Is that when a lot of the technology people in the space, especially in the networking, started to realize, like, oh, we're going to run out if this continues? This was long even before smartphones and other mobile devices that really took off, and Cisco with the Internet of Things, and now every device would need an IP address.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Even as early as 1992, people said, hey, at the rate of growth that we have, we need to worry. Like, we're going to run out eventually. And so they did a couple of ththings. They invented network address translation, so multiple devices can share one IPv4 address.
Yeah.
They invented CIDR, so you could say not just, you could do more granular allocation of blocks. Instead of just large blocks, you could sort of divide up smaller. And that bought us a lot of time. And then they developed IPv6. And I was on the internet at the time, but I wasn't part of the team that was doing that.
Right.
And so it felt like, okay, great, now we have a plan. And then, and it was working. Like, we bought ourselves a lot of years. And in the early 2000s, we started seeing smartphones, and things started really growing from there. And there's this hockey stick of deployment. And actually, many of the mobile carriers were some of the first to deploy IPv6. They said, we have to translate every packet from IPv4, private IPv4 to public IPv4.
Yeah.
We'd be better off if we could do IPv6. And so we had the World IPv6 launch and World IPv6 Day in the early 2010s, and those are great efforts. If you look around now, Google reports IPv6 statistics, and there's something 45% of the world reaches Google sites over IPv6,
right?
And more than 50% of the U.S. So that's pretty good.
Were the workarounds, the network address translation and some of these other workarounds that were deployed early on to slow down the rate of running out of addresses? Did it work almost too well? So now you've got people relying on it. So it's like, well, I don't need to worry about it. Like you said, I don't need to worry about it. It's not my issue. It's someone else's problem.
There's definitely a strong argument to be made there. Yeah. So they worked effectively. Everybody's used to having NAT in their home now. Gamers have figured out how to get around it, which is pretty sophisticated stuff to me.
Yeah.
But so it worked long enough that we sort of lost our sense of urgency. There's also the way the IPv6 protocol was designed was to be, they called it, talked about ships in the night, where you can have dual stack, and everybody will, by the time we run out of IPv4, everybody will have deployed IPv6. We're all set, but they forgot to bake in additional incentives to make sure everybody has a reason to deploy IPv6.
Right.
The biggest problem with IPv6 is people saying it's somebody else's problem. And even when we talk about run out, it's run out for whom? I can go talk to somebody who's had a /16, 65,000 addresses for 30 years, and they say, I could sell some IPv4 addresses, but why would I?
Right.
I don't need to sell all of them, and why would I deploy IPv6? I'm fine.
So where are the big blocks of IPv4 addresses now? Are there still a lot of companies or organizations that are holding on to these addresses, or I guess where are you seeing the people holding on to them?
Yeah, it's so I kind of mentioned before we did the finer, detailed, granular assignment. You could only get blocks in a group of 256 addresses, or 65,536 addresses, or 12 million addresses. 16.7 million addresses. So, and it was basically 8 bits, 16 bits, 24 bits. So there's a reason for those numbers. But that's not very granular. If you need 1,000 addresses, getting 65,000 kind of wastes a lot.
Sure.
So where you go is you go and look at who had allocations from back in the 80s and 90s. And it tends to be, you're not terribly surprised. Oh my goodness, look at all the addresses that HP has, or Apple has, or even Ford Motor Company has a lot of addresses.
Yeah.
They've got those huge blocks. But then a lot of the early companies that were on the ARPANET or the NSFNet, which includes colleges and universities, they tend to have a lot of addresses too. And so a school with 4,000 students maybe doesn't need 65,000 addresses. That's my favorite. Those are the ones that are pretty easy to make a conversation about, hey, how can we help out the students with a little bit of money here?
Right. And when we were talking before the show, I felt like when you were telling me that, there might be a college that they only need 4,000 addresses, but if they've got 65,000, it felt like to me, it's like, are they hoarding them? Are they thinking like at some point I'm going to need them, or is it something else? And I think that, you told me it was probably something else, and it's not a hoarding mentality.
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's
Okay.
a little bit of, look, there's no holding cost. It's not costing me any money to sit on these, especially as IP addresses the price of them in the market has been rising. People say, well, I'm just going to hold on until we hit peak. Well, in some ways we might have hit peak already, so maybe that's not the great decision. And you got to wonder, like, how will you even know? But so it's a couple of things. It's also, there's a little bit of work. Like if you're used to having 65,000 addresses, then you're kind of used to using the /24. You're just kind of used to using a set configuration of 256 addresses on every subnet that you have in your network. And you get used to that. It's easy.
Right.
So going back and renumbering devices, it's a little bit of work that people kind of, I've got other work to do. I've got stuff on my plate.
Right.
And so until there's an incentive for them, they kind of say, I don't really care.
Right. and there was also some inventory tracking issues that you were telling me about too. It's like, I guess, if you had a list of addresses allocated to you 40 years ago, you probably are tracking this through a spreadsheet. Or even paper,
right.
Notebook and paper, right?
So, poetically, the original allocations were given out by John Postel, who's the initial guy, and he famously had a spiral notebook. That was how he was tracking them. Amazing tracking.
Put that in a museum if you still
I want
have
that
it,
in the
right?
Smithsonian.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But it's you described, if it's 40 years, it's not the same person. I mean, is it
Right.
the same notebook?
Right.
Were you even using Excel back in the day? You were using Peachtree or something, right? So, where are those records?
Do you
Where are they
think that
kept?
universities then or colleges that they might not even realize that they have a lot of these, or is it they know and they're just it's low on the list of things to do?
The IT guys know. I mean, the IT team, they're using the IP addresses. They're managing the dynamic assignment pools. They know it's there.
Yeah.
The CIOs, I'm sure, have been hit up by a lot of brokers saying, "Hey, you've got this money," and they say, "I don't care." But the CFOs, the president, the provost, whoever, they might not know that there's value there. But then again, they also don't know what an IP address is, so it kind of wouldn't necessarily make sense. In the early days of this market, a broker would call up somebody and say, hey, you're sitting on $1 million. And they'd go, great, it's a Nigerian prince scheme, right? It's like, this has got to be a scam.
Yeah.
And then, if 5 or 20 people call you and say, well, maybe there's something in this, I should look into it.
So because of this issue with a lot of these different addresses, you now have a situation where you have almost a supply and a demand, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And didn't that created now a trading and selling market? Talk a little bit about that, because I was fascinated by this when you were telling me, which is like it sounds like crypto for the really, really, really not cool people.
It absolutely astonished me. So I was on the board of ARIN, which is the registry for North America of IP addresses. I was on the board when we were talking about, hey, ARIN's going to run out of addresses to give to organizations. And what are we going to do then? And people said, well, there's going to be a market. And we said, that's not allowed by policy. And it's a public policy process. Anybody can participate. And so there's some really heated arguments about you have to allow a market. And other people saying, well, but people were given these addresses for free 20, 30, 40 years ago. That's gross. Like, why should people be getting a lot of money this thing that they got for free? That's not right. That's not internet-y.
Right.
And so finally, what kind of convinced me is, well, all right, if somebody has to renumber or do work in order to make addresses available for somebody who needs them, who's paying for the work?
Yeah.
You're just going to do it out of the goodness of your heart? Well, that's very generous of you. And actually, Stanford University famously gave away a /8. It's 16 million addresses. Very generous.
How long ago was that?
Oh, it was 15, 20 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. That was a while. That was
before they realized how much value was in them?
Exactly. It was before there was a market for it.
Yeah.
But it was the kind of thing that was absolutely consistent with the ethos of internet development. Was we help each other out.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of part of what convinced me, yeah, we're going to have to allow, ARIN doesn't care if you're getting paid or just, making it up in smiles. They just want to know that the addresses are being used by whoever needs them. It's just about stewardship for them.
Yeah.
And that's finally what convinced me to allow it. So yeah, there were companies still growing their networks, and there's companies that had more addresses than they needed. And so that's sort of how market naturally develops.
Is there a central kind of market, like a stock market, like you would see in the stock exchange? But then you also have NASDAQ, and you have other different trading. Yeah. So are there a number of different brokers? I don't even know what the right terminology is. Well,
that's what most people say. That's the right word most people say. So ARIN has a qualified facilitator list. They used to have a list of brokers, which is basically anybody who said, hey, I'm a broker, and you could raise your hand and pay, $1,000, and they'd say, okay, you're a broker, and put you on the site.
Okay.
They got some complaints. And so
because something bad happened, or
something bad happened, or people were just misrepresenting the policies, or just were being dishonest. And so ARIN, middle of 23, we just entered 24. Middle of 23, ARIN announced a qualified facilitator program. And so my company was one of the first. There's now down to a handful of brokers there, but it's people who can demonstrate they know something about the market. They sign a letter of ethics, so a couple of statements. They do background checks on their staff. So there is a qualified facilitator list, but that's just in North America. The RIPE registry has just said, we had this list of facilitators. We were getting complaints. We're just going to delete the list. We're not going to maintain that list anymore.
Oh.
Yeah. So how do you find a broker if you're in Europe?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of good luck. We're also there.
Okay.
And then there are brokers in every region. There's no central. So each of the continents has the central registry: ARIN, RIPE, APNIC, AFRINIC, LACNIC. But there's no central market. IPv4.global is probably the largest, and so we've got hundreds of blocks available for sale.
Okay. Give me a sense of how long this has been going on, like past 10 years, past 20 years?
10 years, yeah.
Past 10 years. When this initially started out, was there spikes in prices, ups and down?
Yeah.
Was it kind of like the Wild West, and now it's flattened out a little bit?
It absolutely was. So there were maybe some background trades that nobody knew about. The first one I think was 2011, where Nortel Telecom was in bankruptcy, and Microsoft bought the addresses out of bankruptcy. And ARIN kind of had to scramble and say, oh, we better have a policy to allow for this if we're going to allow this.
Sure.
So we had a policy for it. But because it was in bankruptcy, the proceeds, the amount was made public, and it was $11 an address. And in retrospect, why'd they pick 11? Nobody knows. It's just sort of all over the place. Nobody knows.
Because it's two ones. It's very geeky.
It's very easy. Exactly.
Well,
nice.
One.
Nice. It was binary. Yeah. Perfect. And so then there were other transactions that happened that nobody knew what the prices were, and they weren't published anywhere.
Yeah.
So I heard stories of $3 an address and $25 an address in the same month. That's all over the place.
Yeah.
In 2014, 2014, Hilco Stream Bank launched their online marketplace. And one of the things they did was immediately say, we're going to publish the transaction price for everything on the marketplace. And there weren't very many at first, but it's really funny. If you go plot the prices that we know about historically, and then you see the publication online, suddenly everybody has the same information and the prices converge. It's no longer 15, 25, 4. It's now all of a sudden everybody's at 10 or 11 or $12 within a buck or two. And so that really, publishing that information at IPv4.global was really gave everybody the same information. So it really made the market more honest and transparent.
Is it now about $11, which is about the price that Nortel sold?
Oh my gosh!
No,
it's not.
Okay, all right. What's the value of now? I'm just asking about IPv4. Like, what's the value of one address? I guess.
I can tell you a little story.
Sure,
it's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So pandemic shut down, like everything changed, right? And kind of the market kind of stood still for a little while. Kind of everybody was holding their breath. Mm-hmm. And then 2021, we sort of came back to work.
Some of us
we thought we were coming back to work, and so a lot of network projects that had been put on hold suddenly got relaunched.
Right.
And as they're relaunching those projects, they go, "Oh, hey,
we need addresses."
Yeah. But the projects that weren't being relaunched right away were the ones to free up addresses. So there was a scarcity, and so in 2021, prices went from about 24. They've sort of been increasing about 10% per year. They went from $24 to an address to $50 an address in 1 year, doubled in a year. Incredible. And then 2022, they sort of flattened and eased a little bit. And then in 2023, we saw this. Oh, one of the things that changed in 2022 also, though, was we saw where large blocks have been trading at a discount per address. We usually talk about per address prices.
Yeah.
They were trading at a discount. Hey, I'm buying in bulk. I want a bulk discount. But any large block can be broken into smaller blocks. So it kind of didn't make sense. So large sellers said, why would I sell you a large block at a discount if I can sell two people smaller blocks for more money?
Right.
So prices which had been going one direction kind of converged and went the other direction. And so then in 2023, large blocks were very consistently in the mid 50s per address, whereas all the smaller blocks kind of came down and came down and came down. We've seen $30 per address recently. Of course, it changes month over month. Actually day over day.
And even though that IPv4 addresses are a limited resource because you've only got so many addresses, it's not like physical. Like if you've got a big block of rock,
right?
Because you have to build into the price the cost of shipping it and all this stuff. All you're talking is just electrons here, right?
Right. There's no whole. It's an integer.
So that's why the big bulk number is the same as your smaller block.
Exactly. Yeah. They're just the same. So for a buyer, there's a little bit of a difference where if I've got to go configure these addresses I bought, I've got to do 250 lines of configuration or one line of configuration, and it matters a little bit, especially if you're buying millions of addresses at a time. You don't want to do tens of millions of lines. That just you start to run into scalability problems.
Right. Is this market only for IPv4, or do you see some IPv6 trading?
Yep.
And the next question is are IPv6 addresses still allocated for free by the ARN? So there wouldn't be a market if you've got a glut of addresses. You don't need to do this trading.
That's exactly right. It's the same question. Is we get people from time to time saying, "Hey, so can you sell my IPv6 block?" And I say, "Why?
Why would you want to?
Why would you sell it?" Right? Yeah. Because buyers can go to ARN or RIPE or whoever and get them essentially for free.
Okay. So does this mean that this market will eventually just kind of go away, or do you foresee like a long future for this?
I do think that eventually the market will ebb. And the question is whether it's in 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to go away entirely because I think for a long time we're going to have pockets of IPv4 only. And we're going to have places that people still want to get to at least some. And so growing networks will still need some addresses. They may be IPv6 only doing some kind of network address translation to the rest of the IPv4 world, but they still need IPv4 to get to the IPv4 world. The market may shrink, but I don't think it's going to collapse completely.
And that's probably also the reason that we're never going to see 100% adoption of IPv6 then too, right? You're going to see, you said what, 50% of the world is now IPv6?
Yeah, about 45%.
And it's going to just keep slowing down and down. Like where do you see that number eventually settling?
Yeah, so I think, deployment curves of new technology tend to look like an S, right? Yep. So you've got a slow ramp up at the beginning, and then suddenly you've got an escalation, and then it sort of tapers off at the top. And so it'll probably look like that in the long run. What I kind of think about though is if you're an ISP, or even if you're we're just running an IT shop at a corporate network, when 98% of the stuff that your users want to reach is available over IPv6, do you still worry about your IPv4 infrastructure? Or do you say, you know what, can we get away without that last 2%? Is anybody going to scream at me? Am I going to lose my job?
Right.
Or are there substitutions? Are there other places we can go? And they may be IPv6 only inside the network and then doing that address translation, which is a great solution. I mean, there are millions of people in the US already sitting like that.
Right, but as we look at the migration from IPv4 to IPv6, is that 50% number good enough right now, or do you think that it needs to get we should still talk about migration in the tech space? And why should we still if it feels like we've hit what we need to hit?
50%, it's not static, right?
Okay.
It's been growing pretty linearly for the past 5 or 6 years. Sort of that S curve. We're in that long, slow middle part of the S curve right now,
Okay.
and so it's a pretty linear growth. What's kind of the reason? Actually, if you look at Google.com/IPv6, they show you their numbers, and it's this funny kind of zigzaggy line where during the week it's a little bit lower, and on weekends it's a little bit higher. And we sort of, why is it such a fuzzy line like that? During the week you're at work. A lot of corporate offices haven't bothered with IPv6. On the weekend, you're at home or you're on your phone, and the residential ISPs and mobile networks have mostly deployed IPv6.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still getting that corporate network, getting those guys to get to the space where they're seeing the other advantages, and they say this is worth putting some time into.
But is there there's nothing catastrophic on the horizon that would suggest, oh my God, there's going to be something where you're going to really, really need it?
No.
Okay. Or is it just a matter of, well, it'll be irritating because it'll take some additional work from your IT team to do something?
Right. So that's kind of the easy answer is no.
Okay.
But the interesting way that I try to get people to think about it is, when will there be something that you need IPv6 in order to be able to do? Right. And I ask that question. People say, oh, not for 5 or 10 years. Okay. How long will it take you to deploy IPv6?
5 to 10 years.
Oh, yeah. Right.
What is the big need for IPv6 then? Is it an application? Can you translate that to an application scenario, or is it more just really deep? There's deep in the weeds.
I mean,
tech stuff?
Most of it is probably deep in the weeds tech stuff. So one interesting one though is the latency. So the amount of time it takes a packet to get from one end to another is just a little bit lower over IPv6 on average than over IPv4. And I've done some digging, and I think that it's because if you have an Android phone, it doesn't require apps to use IPv4. They can to use IPv6, right? So it'll translate from IPv4 to IPv6 in the handset. And so that's just a software process on your phone that's probably adding a couple of milliseconds of latency. And so do that over dozens of transactions to pull down a website, and you're getting a little bit better performance out of IPv6.
Okay, I can see
that. So speed is a little bit, and it's just it's a 10 or 15% difference. It's not a huge difference, but it's enough that if you're really worried about optimizing your network performance, your web performance, or
the reason I'm chuckling in my head is that we got a comment on one of our videos where we were talking about I think Wi-Fi 6 versus Wi-Fi 7,
right?
And I made a comment about, well, I've got my PlayStation set up to the Wi-Fi network, and they're like, no, it should be broadband because of gaming latency, and where some of these people are really focused on milliseconds and microseconds of latency. That could be related to an IPv4 versus IPv6 thing, right?
You get shot before you even see somebody. That is not okay, man.
Well,
that's not right.
Yeah. Who knows at that point? All right. So we were talking earlier about the guy with the spiral notebook, and then I'm assuming that a lot of people then just went to Excel spreadsheets and tracking that way. But there must be better ways of tracking these addresses now. What else developed? Was it just better software, better automated type of things?
So people developed some dedicated software. The acronym is IPAM for IP Address Management. Very clever, right?
Oh, wow.
It's like these tech geeks are good at acronyms, right?
They certainly are.
So they developed IPAMs. And eventually sort of said, hey, we should integrate our IP addressing tool, our address management tool, which keeps track of which address is assigned to which device on the network and which subnet on the network. That ought to be connected to our dynamic allocation pool, our DHCP pool. So IPAM vendors built that in, and they built in connectors to DNS. So this address has this name, and so now it's called DDI for DHCP, DNS, and IPAM. But there's still, if I kind of think where you're going on this, it's a lot of people don't necessarily, if you've changed teams over 3 or 4 years, or you've done a lot of M&A, there's a lot of addresses you may not trust your IPAM. It's just as good as your record keeping. So we developed a tool
Okay, now I don't want to give you a commercial for this.
I'm excited.
All right. And so there
you can do audits.
There are tools available that can do audits and things like that.
Yeah, no, there are audits, and it's actually it's more complicated than you might think, but it's not that hard. It's mostly just legwork.
Okay. The question that I wanted to then get to is, and you touched upon this a little bit as well, is let's say you're an academic organization and you're pretty convinced that you'll never need more than 5,000, and now you're sitting on a block of 60,000 or whatever. I'm just making up numbers. How do you get people to understand that there's value in there if you go into these markets? And is it safe enough for an organization to enter one of these markets, or do they feel like that they don't want to jump in because they're like, well, it might be a Nigerian prince type of scam. Do you see scams going on out there, or do you feel confident that the way that the infrastructure is set up now, they can sell it? And again, the value of this is now you're giving money to an organization where they might not have had one before.
Right.
Or a company even that might be like short of revenue for
anybody.
a year.
And you totally see that all the time. Is hey, it's end of quarter, we need to hit some numbers.
So let's go sell some of our digital numbers.
Right, but also the enrollment cliff. Post pandemic, a lot of schools are going, hey, we're having some budget shortfalls, and so bringing a little bit of cash really helps them. Absolutely. I don't know if I'd say there are scams. I definitely hear stories about some brokers are more or less scrupulous than others, and so that's something to sort of maybe talk to a couple if you're considering that space, because you want to be comfortable that you're not getting a hard sell and not being, sort of overpromised.
Yeah. Is there space for startups in this space to kind of hold the hand of people that want to buy and sell? And again, without mentioning your company or other companies.
So there are a couple of startups that are doing things to help people make their addresses available for sale. And so there are a couple companies already doing that. I don't think any of them is making a killing at it yet. I think because really when you start to look at, and I found this when I was trying to do IPv6 consulting, is I found that when you start to look at the problem that you have, you say, oh, you know what, this isn't actually hard. It's just legwork. I don't need to pay somebody else to do grunt work for me. I just need to get it done, and I'll figure out my own timeline. So I think there's not a ton of room there. In terms of brokers, well, like I said, there were 100, and there probably still are over 100. So there's plenty out there. Is a new startup going to provide extra value that somebody else isn't providing?
Yeah. All right. I want to jump again to, this is now just a dumb question by me. We went from 4 to 6. What happened to 5? And is that a dumb question?
No. There was an IPv5.
Okay.
But it wasn't an internet protocol in the same sense that IPv4 and IPv6 are addressing protocols that include IP addresses.
Okay.
And
is this like IEEE type stuff that we're talking about?
It's IANA is the Assigned Numbers Authority.
Okay.
Yeah. So they assigned the number because they were told to, I guess, by IETF or something. And that's how that came about.
So all right. So we went from 4 to there was 4 or 5, but 5 had nothing to do with the addressing. 6 is now your addressing. Is there going to be a 7 and 8, et cetera, or are we done with these addresses and like 6 is it? Like we're never going to have to go to an 8 or a 9 or a 10.
Some years ago,
or you never know. I mean, in 100 years, we all might have these things in our heads, and there's 6 billion people, and we all need an address.
I did some analysis. I tried to figure out like how fast could we possibly run out of IPv6 addresses, and I said, all right, let's say we assign a range of addresses to every single UPC code, and every single item gets its own host address.
Right. So the box of Cheerios I have in my house will have an IP address.
Right.
Let's assume that.
Which would be ridiculous, right? But you could.
Well, who knows?
So, all right. So for scanning, all right, here we go. Pretend you do that and never use them again. I still couldn't.
Well, once the Cheerios become sentient,
each Cheerio gets an address, right? It still takes 200 years. It was crazy.
Yeah.
What I think is more, and by the way, there have been proposals. People come in from time to time and say, I have a better way of doing this migration and solving the IPv4 runout. And so I've got a proposal for IPv8 or IPv10 or 12 or something. They only use even numbers. I don't know why that is. Maybe there's something unlucky with odd numbers.
It could be. Just like the Star Trek.
Just like the Star Trek movies, right? Yeah. Even numbers are the good ones. So
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to make you lose your concentration. Keep going though.
No, it's my favorite thing.
Right, so you've had these proposals.
So the trouble with proposals is they generally sort of require that you go back and touch every device and do the new protocol, which we're already doing that for IPv6, and we're halfway there. So why would we stop and change something else now, unless you can genuinely prove it's going to be better? What I think is more likely, if I put on like my futurist hat and go like look off into crystal balls, I say, well, maybe in 10 or 20 years we've got a different paradigm for how we do internet technologies, and it will be the internet. It'll be something else like that, where we're using a different address scheme or a different communication scheme entirely.
But it feels like you would need to, again, do an overhaul. And the world of technology always requires that whatever new thing you do have some sort of backward compatibility to it, just so you're not leaving them in the dust, right? Or making them do more work.
Yes, that's absolutely what I would normally think. If I go really crazy, which I'm kind of known to do sometimes, if I went really crazy, I might say, if you started with a walled garden network that was you only need to speak to devices that did this particular thing, then you could start with a whole new addressing scheme. And so that I could imagine that happening within a data center, for instance, or within a mobile network, or within an IoT system, where you're only speaking with those kinds of devices. And then eventually somebody says, we could build a bridge between that system and this system. And then things get messy again. And I don't know what happens then.
All right, and this is my final question for you. It's kind of a geeky-ish. Well, not geeky-ish, but
that's my favorite kind.
I'm just interested. Like, how do you get involved in this? Like, did you go to college for this?
No.
I think you were telling me a little bit about your career history, and it was like, how does one get interested in IP addressing? This is from a journalist. I've always been just into journalism, into technology, but like, how do you start out and then kind of fall into this IP addressing?
I didn't date much in high school. No, honestly, I kind of didn't get out much. I was a socially awkward kind of kid, and then I got into college and I started, and they got me onto at my college. They got me onto the VAX, like the nerdy science fiction kids. Got me onto the VAX, which was then connected to the internet, and I started meeting people from around the world who were as nerdy as I was and had the same kind of offbeat or even normal traditional interests. And I went, this is a great tool for building community, for connecting people in ways that I think people need to be connected. I want to work on this. Unfortunately, by the time I really figured out that's what I want to do, it was my second senior year and I was not going to be able to change majors. And so I had to kind of come around the long way around. And so I started doing internet installations, like brand new T1s. If you're old enough to remember what a T1 is, 1.5 megabits per second. Wow. For businesses that had never been online. I was doing that at UUNet, which then was acquired by WorldCom. And so we did all kinds of things there. And I eventually took over the IP address management for that company, which was a very large company. And then I got on the errand board, and because they said, hey, you don't say stupid things. Maybe you should, you ask interesting questions and you don't say stupid things. Maybe you could be a board member. So that's sort of how I got there. And then I've been, sort of sticking at it for, the last 25, whatever years.
Would you be considered a rock star within the IP addressing space? Because I did some research and I found some seminars that you were given. There's some YouTube videos out there. I don't know if you're aware of these.
I hope nobody's recorded me without my permission, but.
Well, I think it was you were giving a seminar somewhere. It was in a conference room, but there were a lot of, people were really engaging with you, and they were talking about, do you feel like you are, or is it really hard to ask someone if they feel like they're a rock star?
All right, so I did an analysis 12 years ago that was, so I'm deploying IPv6 and I'm trying to decide, do I have to do this? I think I mentioned this, right? And I said, hey, other people might like the way I'm thinking about this, and I should give a presentation on carrier grade network address translation. Does it break things? What does breaking cost me? People say, that is evil. Okay, well, I'm a business guy. Like, how evil? Can I quantify the evilness in dollars? Right? And then compared to the cost of deploying IPv6. All right, but does that solve my IPv4 runout problem? Well, it doesn't really, because I still have to get to the things that are IPv4 only. So I can either do carrier grade NAT or I can buy addresses. For a certain set of assumptions, it looks like buying addresses is a valid response. So I went and said that to the world, and they kind of went, oh, you mean address brokers and the whole market? That's not an evil, dirty thing. It's actually a consideration. All right, great. So I was, when I was dating my girlfriend, I said to her, and she has not let me live this down. I said to her, within a very, very small space, I'm kind of a big deal. Like, you take 1,000 people who know about IP addressing, and most of them know who I am, and go, oh yeah, he's a good guy.
I think we're all kind of a big deal in at least a very, 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 very small circle. Lee Howard, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It was this was probably the most I've ever talked about IP addressing in one long block. But you made it fascinating.
For another hour. Let's do this.
All right. Again, thanks again for coming in. That's all the time we have for today's episode. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.